So welcome to a special musical exploration. My name is Mark Slavkin. I serve as Director of Education at the Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts in Beverly Hills, California. Our organization is proud to present diverse artists in music, dance, theater, and film, and offer a robust mix of educational and arts learning programs under the umbrella GRoW at the Wallis. In addition to our performances and our classes and programs, we also like to host conversations about important issues and ideas in the arts. So today's conversation is about some aspects of music, the idea of composing for orchestra, composing for piano, community service in the arts, and what it means to be a citizen artist. So I'm delighted to be joined today by a terrific young composer from Mexico, Juan Pablo Conteras, and two young musicians who are alumna of our Wallis GRoW programs, Kaitlin and Emily Webster-Zuber. So let's welcome everybody and thank you for being with us. So to start, I want to start with Juan Pablo, and sort of the origin or the idea for this call emanated from a piece that you created called Mariachitlán that I'll let you talk about. But before we get to that, I'm just curious, when did you first fall in love with music?
Excellent question. I think at a very young age, I started playing the violin when I was 6 years old. My mother is a concert pianist, so classical music was always part of the household, and I didn't really think that was too special or too unique until I, went into elementary school and saw that people weren't used to attending orchestra concerts as I was. So I started playing the violin, joined youth orchestras, and eventually kind of switched lanes and became a rock musician. Started to play electric bass in heavy metal bands in Mexico. And until I joined this band that played a genre called symphonic metal, which meant they blended the orchestra with metal music. So that's when I kind of reconnected with classical music, basically became very interested in learning about how to orchestrate, and just really started to learn on my own, picking up scores and trying to figure out how to write for the orchestra. And that's when I decided I wanted to become a classical composer. And I moved to the US to pursue all of my professional undergraduate, master's, and doctoral studies in classical composition, and discovered this possibility of writing for the concert hall, writing for orchestras, and have been in love with it ever since.
And what's the satisfaction or joy you get from composing that would be different than being a performer?
I think just the possibility to have something to say and really, have a voice and have a message, and connecting in a deeper level with the audience. I think that was something that really attracted me to concert music. Writing classical music was this possibility of, being able to communicate with an audience and really connect with them, and be more innovative and creative in what I could say. Typically, if you're a performer, you can just pretty much recreate what has been written. But if you compose, you have this possibility of actually, you know, proposing something new and bringing it to life, which is really, really exciting.
So given all of that, I know a little bit of the answer, but what inspired you to create the piece Mariachitlán? And maybe as part of that, what inspired you to try to fuse together traditional music of Mexico with more traditional Western classical music and your own kind of mashup?
So part of it was, I think, the fact that I moved to the US when I turned 18 to study music at, professional studies, undergraduate, master's degree, and then eventually a doctorate. And kind of just realizing that most of the music that we're taught in music school is, as you say, Western music, and I've been composing, and I wrote very like classical inspired pieces, sonatas, you know, trios and stuff. And eventually I just felt like there was something missing, and that something of my own personality and my background needed to be infused in the music that I was writing. And I tried it out, tried to really blend Mexican traditional music with classical music. And I discovered that as an audience member, I became very excited when that piece was premiered in New York, a piece called Silencio en Juarez, which dealt with kind of the modern problems that Mexico was facing in the border with the US. And that was a point where I said, like, this is something that I should pursue, because I as a listener and as an audience member, that's where I discovered I was very, very passionate about writing that type of music. And Mariachitlán came a couple of years later. It was kind of designed as a competition piece for the national competition that the Jalisco Philharmonic, which is my hometown orchestra, they organized that competition in 2016. I had just moved back to LA and was rediscovering and reconnected with all of these amazing mariachi ensembles. So I wanted to try that out. I wanted to, you know, I'm from Jalisco, the place where mariachi music was invented. And there isn't really a piece, an orchestra piece that blends the two worlds together, mariachi music with like a more classical sound world. And I wanted to tell this story about what it's really like to attend, you know, visit a mariachi plaza in Mexico, and you hear all of these different mariachis competing with each other, playing different songs, different rhythms from mariachi music. So my goal was to kind of try to construct that with the sounds of the orchestra, and really show how mariachi music actually sounds like in the streets of Mexico. I ended up winning that competition, and this has become my most popular orchestral work. It's been done 20 times in Argentina, Venezuela, the US, and Mexico. And since my kind of creative process always starts at the piano, and the first sketches that I wrote for Mariachitlán were all kind of figured out at the piano, I always had this idea of, after the orchestra version was premiered and even received the Latin Grammy nomination, I wanted to write a version of that piece for piano, and for eventually two pianists on one piano, so piano four hands, and also two pianos, so two pianists, one in each piano.
Right. Well, hold that thought. Spoiler alert, we don't want to give away the whole thing. So yeah. I think now is a great time to listen to part of that piece performed by the Jalisco Philharmonic at USC Bovard Auditorium, which is my alma mater as well. So I'm very excited on multiple levels. So let's pause for a second and listen to that. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I know you enjoyed that. Let me just say, in listening to it again, one of the things it reminds me of is American in Paris by George Gershwin. Was that is that piece an influence of yours, or am I just making that up?
I think it's a great, yeah, a great observation. A lot of people told me that once, after the piece was premiered, I didn't really use that as a model. However, I am extremely influenced by American composers like Aaron Copland and Gershwin, who were also in that mission of trying to combine their heritage with classical music. So it's totally
Yeah,
understanding that
yeah. But
that
also using the range of the orchestra to create kind of a soundscape of, like, you can imagine you're in this plaza that you've created. So creating a sense of place, not just the music theme or whatever. Um, so now that we've heard that, so let's go back to, did you start on piano, develop the orchestral score, have it performed, and then loop back to go deeper on piano, or was all the piano composition done first?
Yeah, I typically write almost everything at the piano and then kind of create this like what they call short scores, so where you have like 5 different voices, 5 different lines that you're not sure what instruments in the orchestra are going to play those lines, but you can make a few assumptions like, oh, this could sound good at the trumpet, etc. So I always try to think of it like if you're going to paint a huge mural, you would most likely start with just like a pencil outline of the main characters or what you want to draw, and then add color to that mural, rather than just starting with your red paint and trying to figure out how to make it work. So
Right.
it's always easier to think smaller and just less instruments, and making sure that the actual structure and the musical architecture of the piece works before you start to add.
To fill in the detail. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good analogy. Yeah.
Um,
So let us know that how did you and your piece connect with Kaitlin and Emily, who live here in LA and are young pianists and composers, I should say. Um, Emily, is it true that you and Juan Pablo share that you are winners of the ASCAP Martin Gould Young Composer Award? Yeah?
Yeah, I just found out about that a couple weeks ago, and that's a really big honor I just found out about.
Look, I wanted to congratulate you. I'm very proud to see that, and very honored to have two of you, and not to diminish Kaitlin in any way, who's also amazing and talented, but I think that's so great. But yeah, Juan Pablo, how did you connect then with these two young women?
So I think the first time we met was at a concert with Salastina, an amazing music group here in LA. And we actually shared the stage, as it were. One of my pieces was performed, and then both Kaitlin and Emily premiered pieces that afternoon. So we kind of connected there. And then I had the privilege of teaching them at a music summer festival, teaching composition to them, because they're both great performers and composers, which was a great connection. And I think something that really enhances their own music. So eventually, when I started planning this idea of turning the orchestra piece into these piano versions, I reached out to them and told them about this idea that I wanted to, create like a co-commission for this piece, and really with this idea of collaborating and making this into kind of a shared creative process. I always say that the best composition lessons are learned working with performers and getting feedback. And even though I am an okay pianist, it's always amazing what actual professional performers can do. So that's how this conversation started. And yeah, maybe Kaitlin and Emily can share their version of the story, but it's been amazing to.
Yeah, we'll see if that's true. But the last thing I wanted to add, why not just write a piece for one musician with their two hands at one piano, which I find is often done by great composers? And what led the ambition, like, why not four hands on a piano or two pianos simultaneously?
Excellent question. I think it was the fact that this was an orchestra piece kind of first. So I needed a lot of the notes, so that the range of the piano was constantly needed to be used. So having four hands in each instrument was more convenient, so that one pianist could kind of tackle the higher register and the other the lower register. And really with this idea of turning the piano into an orchestra or vice versa. But at the same time, the challenge was how to make this sound like a piano piece, or something that actually was, idiomatic, playable, and that, ideally people who haven't heard the orchestra version will still like the piano version.
Yeah. So Kaitlin and Emily, what drew you to this piece, or what made you want to pursue it?
Yeah, so I remember actually I saw an Instagram post of Juan Pablo's, and it was a short clip. There's another amazing piano duo in LA, Hockett, and they actually were the first group that co-commissioned this with Juan Pablo. And so I remember I heard them play this short snippet of it, and Emily and I, as a growing and forming piano duo, I reached out to him and I was like, oh, this is such a cool piece. It would be a lot of fun to like work and collaborate with you. And since we'd already known him and worked with him a little bit, he reached out to us then, and that's how we got to play the piece. And it's just really good experience, I think, for Emily and I as composers as well, to be able to branch out into new styles of music and to play music by living composers and kind of build that relationship simultaneously while learning how to connect with performers ourselves.
Yeah. And how is it different than other pieces you played together? I mean, just musically, but just was it a different experience in the way he structured it than the way you've done other work?
Yeah, this is probably the first piece that we really worked with, and just hearing Dr. Contreras, we learned a little bit about his style of composition and how he doesn't necessarily work through the whole piece from start to finish. He kind of comes up with ideas separately and then tries to piece them all together. And that you can really tell that in Mariachitlán, because there's a bunch of little sections that kind of have their own character. And that was probably one of the newest things that Kaitlin and I got to work with in this piece, is trying to kind of create our own story as we go through the piece, and each of these little sections have their own character or setting. And also, one of the really cool things about this piece that we hadn't done before, there's a section towards the end. I don't know if I should spoil it.
Well, what should we listen for?
Well, there's a section at the end that's it'll be surprising. There's a police whistle, and then a section where Kaitlin and I are speaking while we're playing. And it was really hard to coordinate as we were first learning the piece, but it's become one of our favorite sections to play, and it really grabs the attention of the audience.
Yeah. Not your typical piano piece.
Yeah. So the idea there, like just the narrative, so that people can imagine what's going on. That was the first thing I came up with, was this idea of like, this is gonna be like a very loud and fun mariachi party, and eventually I'm gonna have like a policeman trying to stop the party. And I said, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have like the orchestra, in this case the pianist, like chant the title as if they were saying like encore, encore, like asking for more music. So that's what's going on there. Like that's kind of the storyline behind why the orchestra or the players get to speak the title of the piece and eventually scream it, and then there's more music. So yeah, that's a kind of a fun moment that really is not too expected in the classical world.
Yeah. And did anyone tell you you're crazy for doing that?
The
At the beginning,
musicians.
yeah, so
because you didn't hire a choir to accompany it. Yeah.
I think once they get used to the idea, it's a fun thing to do, and but I know orchestras don't like singing. That's something that's like a huge no. But speaking was, and then I built it in a way where they would start whispering and then louder and louder, so that could also like build their confidence as they were doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
So we should add, Kaitlin and Emily, that you've now been able to perform it together on two separate facing pianos, but also sitting on the bench together with four hands on one piano. So tell us about which version we're going to hear now and what should we know about it?
Yeah, so the version that you guys will be hearing, it was actually recorded and performed at the Doheny Mansion, which is located on our school's campus. So Emily and I are both pianists and composers, and we study at Mount St. Mary's University in Los Angeles. And so we actually had the opportunity from Mount St. Mary's to perform and record this piece in the Doheny Mansion, which is on the Doheny campus in downtown Los Angeles. So we're recording the four-hand version. And it was just a really cool experience to be able to perform in that space. So we hope you enjoy that recording.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful space. So it kind of accompanies the piece really well because you get to see all this architecture that's surrounding us at the piano, and then you have the architecture of the piece. It's different styles, but it goes well together. We think so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What were the acoustics like in that amazing space?
Well, we actually we had a recording, so we recorded separately at the studio, and this was actually our first time. So what we did was we the videographer kind of set up cameras around the piano when we were at the mansion, and we played kind of miming the whole performance while the audio was playing. So it was the first experience we had doing that, but it was challenging and it was really fun, and kind of the next step in our professional careers.
Yeah, it was tricky. We had to play along with our recording, but it was a really cool experience.
In the symphonic heavy metal world, they call that lip syncing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
well,
the main reason we had to do that was just because the acoustics are really nice, but for recording it gets a little muddy, and we just decided to record it separately so that we could make the most of the recording.
well, I think they did a great job, whoever was involved, because that was not obvious to me at all. But let's now let everyone hear and see for themselves. So we'll share that video. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing your musical talent. And it was just great to compare and contrast the orchestral version that we heard with this version that we shared. So maybe for Emily and Kaitlin, when did you fall in love with music, or how did you fall in love with music?
So we actually started off on piano. Our mom actually signed us up, and we were both homeschooled, so it was a great opportunity to kind of start getting into music. None of our family are musicians though. So we're the first musicians in our household. We kind of started out really young. And then we started in choir and tap dancing and music theory. So we kind of did it all. We started at the Colburn School in downtown Los Angeles. And so after a while, piano kind of became the focus. And then as we got a little bit older, because I'm 3 years older than Emily, but we got the opportunity to start playing duets together. And that's really kind of what made piano the focus, is getting to work together a lot as sisters and forming into a duo. So
Awesome.
What would you add, Emily?
I guess we started, I was 6 and Kit was 9. So we kind of, we were able to gradually like take on duo and duet work. And I think that's definitely something we're going to be continuing, because it's really great. We have this kind of connection as sisters, and we're living together. So we have a lot of experience working together from non-musical activities. And I think that kind of collaboration, we were able to bring it really easily into working together through piano and through the other musical projects that we've been working on.
Right. Yeah, which is so great. So having a musical partner probably drew you to play and practice more than maybe if you were all by yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just thinking about this past year during COVID, and we talked to a lot of friends about how, you know, they don't get to practice with other people, but Emily and I, you know, are in the same room all the time, so we get to practice and kind of hone our skills together. So yeah.
So maybe on that note, we met several years ago at the Wallis that I had offered a class to bring together young classical musicians and jazz musicians and sort of mash it together and stretch everybody to go a little bit out of their comfort zone. So I'm curious, what drew you in to do that? Because that's not an obvious thing to do as young classical pianists, focused in that way. What was the appeal, and maybe what did you take away from that?
Yeah, so we had been to a lot of concerts at the Wallis Theater before, and it was really a place that Emily and I really enjoyed going to growing up, going to concerts there or dance performances. And when we participated in this class, it was really interesting because, you know, coming from Colburn, where we would, you know, follow the traditional classical piano path, it was much like more open-minded. We got to, Emily and I, for example, had to improvise, and that's something you wouldn't typically ask of a classical musician. And then the jazz musicians, you know, they were reading music, which is, you know, totally different for them as well. So it was kind of, you know, working with these skill sets that we hadn't really been introduced to. And Emily and I were very open to kind of, you know, getting to learn something new in our classical world and kind of incorporate it into our new projects. So I think it was just a really great opportunity to kind of give us the courage as classical musicians to learn new skills and then take that into our community as musicians and performers.
Right. And I think, Juan Pablo, you're an example that great musicians and composers are able to travel among all sorts of styles and genres and are not just narrowly in one category. So yeah. You had mentioned your symphonic metal experience informed your thinking about orchestration and arranging and so on. So,
and I think, I mean, fortunately nowadays, you know, it's a little bit more accepted to kind of do lots of things. And I mean, Kaitlin and Emily are composing and performing, and it's yeah, you know, people are a little bit more open also to hear different genres being combined within the classical spectrum, which I think is very exciting, and just, you know, it really embraces more cultures and more possibilities as to what the orchestra or the classical world can do. Because really, I mean, to me, one of the most exciting things is that classical music is designed with performance without microphones, which is something that's very interesting and exciting, how everything is happening just live without any enhancement. And I think just having that possibility of bringing in different styles and, you know, showcasing them in this medium is truly amazing.
Yeah, and I think there's an awareness now that we need to celebrate a much more diverse range of composers in the classical world, orchestral world. And to me, part of that is to bring different styles and voices to the table. It's not just the same old thing, but written by a different person, but different voices, different perspectives, different cultural influences. I think if we're lucky, we benefit from all of that.
It used to be, I think, in the old times, in the Mozart times, typically composers were performers as well, and every concert of music they presented was pretty much based on premieres and writing new music so that it could be actually performed. And then we kind of went through this period where we became specialists in like just recreating works that already existed and kind of separating the creators and the performers, which I don't think has been a great thing. So I'm also really excited to see that now it's coming back to this idea of like everyone could or should have the opportunity to also write music and perform it. And yeah, there's been a greater boost of also just being more excited about premiering new music and trying to, share with people the fact that classical music is very much alive, and that, the future is in doing both things, just like museums do, where they show masterpieces and new stuff. I think that's something that I'm excited to see that it's happening more and more, where both things can come hand in hand and be a part of a program of.
Yeah. I've heard Gustavo Dudamel say we shouldn't call it classical music, we should call it great music, because there's a baggage with classical, like old, fancy, distant, that kind of tradition, versus great music. Who doesn't love great music? And let's open ourselves to great music. So speaking of great music, Kaitlin and Emily, what inspired you to create Musical Traces? And maybe share a little bit about that work or that project.
Yeah, sure. So Musical Traces actually started because we were participants in a chamber music program, and they had a separate program kind of in the major one that was a fully student-led community service outreach. And I think Kaitlin was the first of me and her to participate on that student board. But the experiences that we had going out into the community, we've been to libraries, a blind children's center, the Veterans Administration, and just these experiences we've had, being able to bring classical music, and sometimes not classical music, but just the experience of the audience and these different, either the blind children or the veterans, and just anybody who comes into the library. It was really moving for us. And so we wanted to continue being able to bring this music into our community. And so we decided to start Musical Traces for the students that we know, just to participate in and perform music with us. And we would do all sorts of duet projects or other pieces with other instrumentalists, just to kind of make it fun for us and the audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really came about to kind of open the classical music world and, the music world to people who don't typically have access to that kind of music. For example, the libraries, the first few concerts we had homeless people that would come in, and for them to be able to sit in and listen to music performed by these young musicians for an hour, rather than having to think about what they might have to face on a daily basis, was just really humbling for both them or for us to be able to do that for them, and then just for them to experience that. And I think it really, what I saw, at least, I was 16, 17, but what I really saw with the younger students that were playing is that they realized that their music could do more than just be a performance. It could actually affect people, affect really young blind children, and it really impacted them in a way that you don't typically see just going and listening to a concert. So that's really what made Musical Traces kind of come about. And now it's kind of forming into how Emily and I can collaborate with professionals like Professor Conteras, and work on new projects, and bring that to our audience and other audiences as well, like the Wallis.
Yeah, which is so great. Yeah. For Juan Pablo, what's your sense in your own musical training? Do we do enough to instill this value of service, this idea of a citizen artist who doesn't just serve the world in a concert hall, but also has an obligation and a responsibility to use their gifts to help people, to bring joy, to address issues? What's your take on that? Are we instilling that baking that into the training of musicians?
That's an excellent question, and I think we're getting there, but there needs to be more of that. I think one of the challenges with learning and teaching classical music is that it's such an art form, such a craft, and such a complex thing to be able to perform classical music, that you can spend 9 years in music school, as I did, and you're still learning about how to move this note to this note, and it's very technical, and sometimes we forget the big picture, which is exactly what you're saying, Mark. Is like, why are we writing music, or why are we playing music? Who do we want to connect with? Who's our audience? what can we do so that people feel more included in this experience? And I think those fundamental questions should be asked more, and it's something that I try to do in my own teaching, and that I think is essential for this medium to survive as well. I think we need to really think about, you know, how our music is affecting people and how it can connect with them, and really, as you say, serve our communities with classical music. And it's something also that really attracted me to reach out to Kaitlin and Emily with this project, was that sometimes, you know, collaborations should happen more often, and it shouldn't be like just one person isolated doing something and then just having a bunch of musicians playing that. And to me, and this is something that I told Kaitlin and Emily, it's such a privilege to really be able to spend a lot of time with a performer and really hash out everything, and you know, transform a piece that I wrote into something that's truly playable and enjoyable and really comfortable in the piano. So I mean, this kind of co-commission of Mariachitlán had 9 ensembles join, most of them more in like the older professional stages. But I've spent more time with Kaitlin and Emily working on it, because I think, I mean, I have gained so much from having their input and hearing them do all of these different versions. And I think that's something that should also be kind of a part of the conversation, or something more common in classical music, which is constant collaboration, and not, as I was saying, this separation between I just perform and I'm, you know, I don't play new music. It should really be more of this idea of like, what can we achieve together, and how can we also like, I thank you for inviting us, because I think these conversations are essential. I think a lot of people still think of composers as ghosts, you know, dead people that we can no longer communicate with, and that, you know, and I think it's really important to be able to reach out to people and just say like, we're here, we're doing this, there's new music and classical music still being composed and performed. And, you know, honestly, I think as classical musicians, we really enjoy just being able to connect with people and have these conversations and bring them in. And, you know, so
Yeah.
as you can tell, I'm very excited about being.
I think that's great. And I think, I mean, there are lots of benefits of being alive, I would say, but one of them is your ability, A, to hear your own music played, but also to collaborate with a conductor or even musicians in the orchestra to say, let me give you feedback, or here's what I'm trying to get from this passage, is fantastic. Where we can't always do that with the score. We're trying to decipher what the intent of Mozart was based on these little markings. We can't ask him, but we can ask you. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So Kaitlin and Emily, now, I mean, you've done so much at a fairly young age. What are some of your goals or ambitions looking into the future, where you want to travel musically and professionally?
Yeah, so one of our main goals is to continue working as a piano duo, because the collaboration aspect of music is really important to us. And what we've kind of built in the last couple of years, as far as our duo repertoire and our skills, has really affected the way that we have gone about our other musical education. So definitely we're going to continue our piano duo experience. We're also very interested in continuing the composition and using that as an opportunity to kind of explore collaborations outside of a duo or with other musicians, to try to create a bigger community of music playing, I guess. And then another thing we're interested in is actually film scoring. We love film scoring. We've had a couple of opportunities to work with that. So those are just a couple of skills that we're hoping to acquire in the very near future.
I love that. Yeah, what would you add, Kaitlin? Or not that that's not enough to do all those things.
No, I mean, I definitely think just like working together. I mean, I transferred actually from a different school to come down and be a duo with Emily, just because, you know, even though I was only 2 hours away, it really takes a lot of time and energy to really make a duo work, which I think is it's different for Emily and I than most other duos, which we're really lucky to be sisters. And, we're kind of really working to drive that point in our career, just because we have that ability to constantly be working together and really take that relationship and make it the most meaningful that we can. And I think that is also the most impactful way that we can help others and, collaborate with people like Professor Contreras. Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's so great. So I want to close with this question for each of you, which is for maybe a young musician, whether they're a teen or maybe they're in college or they're an early career musician, what advice or what would you urge them, what would you leave them with as something to think about or something that to consider as they move forward? Who would like to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
A couple of things. One thing, I think it's very important to enjoy every single performance opportunity and collaboration opportunity as if it were, the best thing, or the goal, or what you aspire to. I think sometimes we are taught, or we're giving this laundry list of, oh, we need to achieve X, Y, and Z. Like, when you get to perform at Carnegie Hall, or when you get to do this thing at Disney Hall, then you'll be happy, or that will be a good musical experience. And I think what I've discovered in my musical career is that every single opportunity is equally and enjoyable. So really getting in this habit of actually thinking, like, putting your best effort in every performance and enjoying it as if it were what you've aspired to do is something that's extremely healthy, and that really is what you should be doing. Really enjoying and appreciating every single musical opportunity, because I can assure you, once you get there to Carnegie Hall or Disney Hall, it's gonna be equally good. So don't kind of construct your musical aspirations as like, oh, I'm not gonna be happy until I get there. Like, really, musical happiness is every single performance and collaboration opportunity. So and just more in a more philosophical sense, that's where you'll really kind of enjoy music making. Which leads me to my second piece of advice, which is never lose that kind of joy of making music. I think once you start to pursue it professionally, it can become challenging. You're trying to piece together a living and aspiring to achieve a lot. But it's really important to always kind of remind ourselves why we make music, and really try to channel and connect to that joy, so that we're constantly in that beautiful place that I think musicians can really access. So never lose that preciousness of why music is so important to us, even if it gets challenging. Try to think back to why you're doing it, and I think that's something important to always keep in mind.
Yeah, I think it's well said, which is just find the joy and appreciate what you have right now, because ultimately you'll learn that life is short, and you don't want to look back and say, I blew those years. I was so uptight or anxious or locked in a practice room, never having fun, and I wish I had. And then it's too late. So I appreciate that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Kaitlin, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, for young musicians and performers, I would definitely say to try to work on composition, and whether that be at their own instrument or, at the piano. But I think that just having done composition for a few years now alongside piano playing has really just enhanced my overall musical experience. And I think the two really do go hand in hand. So learning to kind of build both of those skills simultaneously opens up a lot of new doors, such as not only just being the performer, but actually being able to work with young musicians on your own pieces, and then also work with professional composers and understand how to talk to them as a pianist or as a composer. I think it just opens up a whole new door of opportunities if you kind of work both of those simultaneously.
Great. Yeah. And Emily.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot, and I think just based on like the composition aspect of that, I actually, when I started composition a couple of years ago, I did not want to do it at all. I was focused on piano, and I was like, I can't explore composition right now. But my mom pushed me to do it, and that actually the the first piece that I had to really complete was through the Salastina program that Dr. Contreras was mentioning earlier. And that it pushed me to get to the deadline, but it also inspired me after that I can do it. And just the idea of taking any opportunities that come your way, because we had the opportunity of working with the teacher, just to take those opportunities, because they really can turn into something that you can grow to love, even if you don't start liking it. That's what happened with me for composition, and it's been really fun to work with. And also, as Kaitlin was saying, it's really contributed a lot to my overall musical education, especially learning piano. But I think that for students, just getting the opportunity of working on any kind of musical like composition, or just trying to create different programs with their fellow student musicians, will really create that sense of community that a musician doesn't necessarily always have access to if they're stuck in a practice room.
Yeah, that's the other advice I was going to give, is go out into the community, because I think you learn a lot from working with people who are non-musicians and seeing how your music impacts those people, because that's really the reason that we should all be thinking about, why do we even play music? Why do we love music? I think going out into the community really opens up your eyes to that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's such a great, thank you. That's a great note to end on. The idea that music is only created to be shared and heard by someone else. Like, that's the whole point. It's a form of human communication. Otherwise, it's like writing a book that no one ever sees. Like, kind of, what's the point of that? So the idea of touching others with your gift is what it's all about. So all of you have done that so beautifully. And I know they have great things ahead of each of you, that I'll look forward to following your path and supporting you in ways that we can from the Wallis. So thank you for sharing today and for being with us. And for those of you listening, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the Wallis Annenberg Center, and for Mark Slavkin. Thank you so much for having us. We're really grateful for this opportunity.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you.